The current conservative love affair uh, with all things military is contradictory to liberty and smaller government. Sometimes I refer to it as the conservative church of the military, where even the person who's the biggest budget hawk in the world suddenly seems to believe that every dollar spent through the military is somehow washed of the bad government aura that comes with other government spending. Uh, Conservatives tend to have an overrated, overblown view of what the military membership is like. Now, just a little bit of my own background, just so you don't think I'm some tree hugging peacenik. I was in the Air Force. I was in for 20 years. I was overseas almost half the time. Uh, a good portion of that, I was actually excuse me, I was stationed with Army units, and I was deployed to Gulf War II, attached to the Army, which is a thing that typically doesn't happen when you're in one branch. So essentially, I had orders uh, releasing me from the Air Force and attaching me to the Army for that particular operation. So it's not like I'm some armchair general looking in, pretending I know something about the military. I actually know a fair amount. So, the first thing I want to throw out is the idea that a lot of conservatives and the people in general get this idea that, like, the military, you put some troublemaking kid into the military remakes him into this incredibly wonderful person, and the military is this transformative experience that just makes great citizens. In fact, some conservatives think we should have the draft just for that purpose. Um, but really, the population of the military is a reflection of the population at large. I mean, it's drawing from the same class of it's drawing from the general population. The military is going to look like the general population. Now, I would say there are some notable exceptions. Like if you've got a person, the type of situation where the transformative effect works is if the person was generally a good person in the first place, but they're either in a bad environment or running with bad people. Uh, Changing their environment and changing the people they're associating with dramatically changes the outcome of what that person would be. But you got to think that the military itself, I mean, it follows the same 80-20 rule that any other organization does. 20% of the people do 80% of the work. And you have vast swaths of people who, I mean, on one end, I practically would call some of the people I worked with welfare recipients. You know, yeah, they put on a funny suit for the day, and they went and parked themselves behind a desk. And if they did anything for a particular day, it was a miracle. And they drew the same paycheck I was drawing. Uh, and then you have a lot of people who essentially are, for all intents and purposes, bureaucrats in uniform. That's all they are. Now, mind you, we have the military does have exceptional people. I mean, it follows the 80-20 rule. On the far end of things, you do see some great people who do extraordinary things, but they're not the majority. The rest of the military is what it is. It's a subsection of our population. Take, for example, like Lieutenant Colonel Vindman. He was the gent who was in charge of Ukrainian foreign policy and essentially decided that the president didn't have a right to direct foreign policy. Okay? So, an indicator of a person who has loyalties in directions other than the Constitution, other than the chain of command. And then look at General Mark Milley. Um, I mean, you can have some arguments over what he's doing, but I don't really, if you're a conservative, I wouldn't think you'd be very happy with his at least woke leaning agenda. And Lieutenant Colonel Vindman and General Mark Mealy are products of this system. They're not like they're not abhorrent outliers. They're part of the mix that's pulling in there. They're part of the great 80%. Okay. So another myth that a lot of conservatives and general populace gets hung up on is the idea of military efficiency. Uh, Military efficiency doesn't exist. It's just as wasteful uh, as any other government operation, if not worse in some places. Now, the reason why the military gets this myth of efficiency is because they can get things done that other parts of the government can't. And there's a reason for it. It has nothing to do with efficiency, because the military is the one organization on the planet that can say this: you can't go home until this is done. Okay? Miracles happen when you do that. When you tell a person you can't go home until this gets finished, yes, they will do extraordinary things. They will uh, they will give you the most fantastic output they can get away with in making things get done. And the other thing is in any military endeavor, uh, money generally is no object. If a budget is to be blown on something that's high priority, uh, they will just continue forward, assuming that they will be recompensated in the following budget, or money will be pulled from other parts of the budget to fulfill the obligation, which it will be. I mean, that's just the nature of things. Okay, so this is something that I think shouldn't be need to be said. If you claim to have any grasp of economics at all, you should know that war is not good for the economy. If you have doubts about this, you really need to start looking at some free market economists explaining exactly what happens. Uh, War itself is probably the ultimate broken window fallacy of all time. Not only aren't wars good for the economy, but military spending is not good for the economy. Paraphrasing Eisenhower, I mean, every ship that puts out to sea is houses not being built. Uh, every stockpile of bombs put together are schools not being funded. Uh, there is no endless supply of money. You're basically taking from one for the other, and for the most part, uh, military production, although necessary, not inferring that we can basically go all pacifist and hug a tree. I'm saying that it's not good, so that every penny of military spending has to be scrutinized to the utmost degree, because you are taking from something else. Uh, if you're a good free market economist, you look at it as you're taking money out of somebody else's pocket they might have used to improve their lives. Um, if you're a crappy Keynesian, you could at least have the logic of understanding that uh, there might be more beneficial government programs than building tanks. Okay, one of the things that becomes really apparent when you've been in the military is you get to see the really incestuous relationship between military industry, military contractors, and the military procurement system. In a lot of cases, you have situations where you have military contractors uh, performing, uh, basically setting the parameters of tests that either uh, will ultimately determine whether the thing they make gets purchased by the government or the thing somebody else makes gets purchased by the government who already has a relationship with that contractor. This system, the way military industry works, because if you look, I mean, at the risk of sounding hyperbolic, our military industrial contractor procurement system uh, is at the very least socialistic. Uh, it probably would be even considered uh, mid-term fascistic in the fact that so many industries are essentially crowded out, and there's a handful of industries that are essentially permanently in on the take. Uh, the system is not free market. It is done well since World War II because most of the potential adversaries we went up against either didn't have the budget we have to available to us, or alternately, they had systems that were even worse and less efficient. But this is not a free market system. It's not efficient. It's incredibly wasteful. It's unbelievably wasteful. Uh, we spend preposterously more money than any other military on the planet. Yet our military, and I believe the last figure I heard is we spend 10 times more than our next closest peer. Okay. Is our military actually 10 times bigger, 10 times better than that peer? And I would say probably not. We're spending a lot. Yes, we definitely spend 10 times more than our nearest peer. But are we getting the bang for our buck on that? And if you understand the efficiency of the system, I would say very unlikely. We might be twice as good technologically. We definitely aren't bigger. So, one of the things we have to kind of look at is the idea that we can't indefinitely maintain this level of spending. We're going to have some point where, due to debt obligations, downturns in economy, and all the various forces coming together, where we're going to have to rethink exactly what we spend our money on. And the military isn't going to be immune from that process. Okay. Our current overseas military apparatus can't function without the massive security state and foreign policy establishment that are adjacent to it. If you've ever been overseas dealing with the military in a foreign country, uh, you'll see that it's heavily interwoven uh, with the State Department. It's heavily interwoven with the various intel agencies, NGOs, contractors, and everything else that goes through it. Uh, it's very, very expensive. Every little spot we put our footprint on is tremendously expensive. So if we just looked at it in terms of if the system we have, to call it corrupt is kind of an understatement. It is almost it's almost a well-oiled machine for laundering money. I mean, yeah, it does produce stuff, but it does it at an incredibly high cost. And um, although somebody making stuff for the U.S. military deserves to profit, there's a lot of money that exchanges hands that literally produces nothing or produces something for an exorbitant cost. If somehow we could clear the board, or it's like, okay, let's just take the whole system, scrap it, and start over again, we could probably build a stronger, cheaper, more advanced military That also would be far safer for our republic. At this time, our military has not been a direct danger to the republic, other than in terms of the security state that supports it is starting to get out of hand, and also it costs. I mean, essentially, if you look at the cost of the military per year and consider it over the many years we've been running at this level of spending, you can imagine what we could have accomplished if that money were going someplace else. And it requires looking at our overseas national interests. Now, in a lot of ways, the primary job is keeping the sea routes open for free trade. Secondarily, it's keeping access to raw materials and overseas production. And the question we have to ask is, are we getting a good return on investment of that? I don't know the answer because I don't know if anyone's actually calculated that. But going back to our ideas of how efficiently the military does things, I would say we're probably not getting a good return on investment in terms of how much we spend versus how much we get back. Considering how special interests can convince the government to do things, I would suspect that there are various businesses and entities and other things that uh, profit greatly off the military just doing its military, basically being a security blanket for various regions around the world, where they're essentially, in order to operate in those areas, need the military security there, and essentially the rest of the nation pays for that in their taxes. There's probably a disproportionate benefit in that case, where these entities are getting much larger benefit than the average person at large. I would say it seems unlikely that the worldwide presence that we are currently doing can be maintained indefinitely. We can't be everywhere all at once and be effective doing it. At the very least, we need to start thinking of terms of re-entrenchment. Are there places that we need to pull back from so that we can do other areas more efficiently? Now, as a libertarian, ultimately, I would like to see as little overseas presence as humanly possible. Uh, Realistically, I realize this is not a process that's going to happen overnight. However, if we go on the assumption that we can keep doing things exactly the way that we are, we're probably going to be in for a rude and embarrassing shock. If you are a conservative who believes in smaller government and liberty, uh, those two items are impossible as long as you have a world spanning military backed up by a massive security state, backed up by a massive foreign policy establishment. Uh, you can't get liberty and smaller government under uh, that particular setup. So, just some things to think about. And it's not something we're going to be able to do in any short order, but it's something that needs to be considered in the long term. You know, if we can't keep doing things the way we're doing, it'd be smart to be thinking about what we should be doing next. Okay, so please consider hitting the like button. What do you think? Do you think conservatives are too entrenched with their mindset of loving the military to have an objective view on how it should be funded and deployed? Comment below. Tell me what you think. If you think somebody might find this interesting, please share it. And if you like what I had to say, please consider subscribing to my channel. I put out content several times a week, probably typically no more than once a day. I'll probably be daily for a little while because I have a little bit of content backed up. But thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.